Open your Bibles with me to Luke chapter 6. We're actually going to bounce around quite a bit tonight, but we're going to start out in Luke chapter 6. And so that's where I'll send you first. Before we do that, let me ask you a question. How much do you love people? Would you consider yourself, in general, would you consider yourself a loving person? And when I say that, I mean I say that obviously knowing that when I ask that question, it's going to mean different things to different people. Because your next question to me is probably, well, what people are you talking about? When I say, do you generally love people, you say, well, what people do you mean? Do you mean like people that are close to me? Do you generally love people that you don't know very well? What are you talking about? And we're going to examine all of that. And so my answer to you would be a little more confusing. But just in general, do you consider yourself a loving person? Someone who generally just loves other people, regardless of whether you know them or not, regardless of your relationship with them. Would you consider yourself someone who just generally loves others? Because that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about loving other people. And I'll go ahead and say from the beginning that, as usual, when I am asked to preach here, when I'm asked to preach anywhere, really, if I get to choose the topic, it's usually something that I've been studying for myself and something that is going on in my own life and something that I need to talk about and something that I've been struggling with for a while. And so I say that to say that I've been questioning for myself whether I am generally a loving person, whether in general I love other people. Unfortunately, the answer has kind of shocked me, and I've kind of come to the conclusion that I'm not as loving as I think that I should be, or maybe not as loving as I wish that I was, or maybe not as loving as I thought I was. And so I'll go ahead and say that just anything that comes out after this applies to me just as much as it applies, hope maybe to you. So, but just know that that's where I'm coming from on this. But I've been examining my own life and how I treat other people, whether to their face or whether just in my own head, because we do treat people certain ways in our head, don't we? Maybe in ways that we wouldn't treat them outwardly. And so I've been really trying to examine that for myself and have come to some interesting conclusions and some things that I definitely need to examine more thoroughly. And so I've got three groups of people that I've asked myself, how do I love these people? And so we're going to go through all three of those tonight. And the first group of people is enemies. Now, when I say enemies, I don't know what comes up in your mind. I don't know who you consider to be your enemy, if you have any. I know that for me, it was difficult for me to come up with somebody who is my enemy. Okay. An enemy, obviously, is someone who works actively against you, somebody who seeks to undermine you, someone who seeks to push you down, someone who seeks to alter your course and prevent you from doing what you're trying to do, right? That's your enemy, your antagonist, someone who's working against you. And so, obviously, all of us as Christians have enemies in people who are trying to undermine the message of Christ, right? People who try to undermine the Bible, people who try to undermine our witness, people who try to discredit what we do or what we believe. Those would be general enemies that we all have. But when I was thinking about it for myself, I can't really think of someone in my own life personally that I would consider an enemy. I racked my brain trying to think of some people, and I couldn't really think of anybody that I know of that I would consider an enemy to me. Maybe people of a rival football team or something like that, but they're only enemies certain times a year, right? But that's as close, I guess that's as close as I could get to an actual enemy. And that's a blessing, I think. I think for me, I rejoice in that. I rejoice that God has blessed me in that way where I at least don't feel that kind of pressure from somebody that's actually seeking to undermine me on a regular basis. But we do have enemies. And maybe for you, your enemy is maybe somebody at work. I have a bit of a unique job, so I don't have like regular coworkers that I'm around every day. But maybe for you, your enemy is somebody at work. Maybe it's a quote-unquote rival coworker. Maybe you have competing project proposals, or maybe you have somebody at work that just regularly has a bad attitude, or someone who seeks to undermine the efforts of a group or undermine your personal efforts or something like that. Maybe you have a boss that does that. Maybe you even have friends. Maybe you have family members that work that way in your life. Maybe those people are toxic relationships that you have. For younger people who are still in school, maybe you have bullies at school that would be considered your enemies. Or you could even just have people at school that try to undermine what you do and try to undermine who you are. And so for you, whatever that means for you, whoever your enemy happens to be, how do you love that person or that group of people? Do you love them? And if you do, how do you do that? And so we as Christians, as I said, obviously have enemies that work against us. And so we have to answer this question for people that work against us as Christians, whether we have personal enemies or not in other respects. We do have people that do work against the witness of Christ and the Word of God. And so how do we love those people? And how do we treat those people? And Jesus tells us, fortunately, Jesus tells us how we're supposed to love these people. In Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 27, it says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them." This is pretty counterintuitive stuff here. When we think about enemies, when we think about people who wrong us, people who commit fraud, or people who just physically hurt us, or emotionally or psychologically harm us, or things like that, it's not our gut reaction to be very loving to that person, right? It's not our gut reaction to try to find a way that we can do good for that person. And in fact, even in our society here in America, that's not the American way, right? The American way is survival of the fittest, right? The American way is look out for number one. What can you do for yourself? How can you make yourself better? How can you attain a higher life, a better life for yourself? And what do you have to do to get past all the people and all the obstacles in your way to get to that point where you feel that you need to be? And so it's not our natural inclination as humans, and it's not our natural inclinations in our society. When people wrong us, we have this sense of justice of how that wrong needs to be made right, right? And especially personally. And he uses some different examples here. Someone who strikes you on the cheek. I, fortunately, did not get in many fights when I was growing up. Not at school anyway. My sisters and I had a few tussles, and if you want to call them those. I was quite a bit bigger than they were. They outsmarted me a couple of times. But I fortunately didn't get in many fights in school, and so I didn't really have to actually. I can't think of a time where there was someone who actually just physically smacked me in the face, with the intent to hurt me, right? With the intent, like attacking me, physically attacking me to fight me. But I can't imagine how incredibly frustrating that would be, or just the anger that would probably immediately rise up of someone trying to attack you, or of someone trying to shame you. Because this is what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about both sides of that. I believe he's talking about both sides of someone who's physically attacking you. But he's also, probably even more so, talking about someone who's trying to embarrass you. Someone who's slapping you out of shame, someone who's trying to shame you. And so when you think about that, and you think about someone physically assaulting you, what is your natural reaction to do for that person? You're going to hit them back, right? That's what they get. You know what I mean? They hit me first, and you hear that from kids too, right? You hear that from children. That's their natural reaction, right? Well, he started it, right? Or she did it first. You know what I mean? Like we have to pay them back because that's what they did to us, right? And Jesus is saying, no. We're going to change that around, and we're actually, if they're going to smack us on one side of our face, we're going to turn our head and let them smack us on the other side. We're going to sit there and take it. He says here, from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Someone who's taking your things away from you. And it has this connotation of someone who, they're not taking it from you willingly, right? You're not giving it up freely. It's someone who's taking it, someone who doesn't deserve it, who didn't ask you for it. You guys didn't make a deal on that transaction. That's something that's happening against your will. And so our natural reaction, if somebody takes our stuff, what do we want to do? We want it back, right? We want it back, and we may not just take what they took from us. We may take something of theirs too, right? That's kind of what you get, but that's not what Jesus tells us to do with our enemies. In the book of Matthew, see, this is Luke's account of the Beatitudes and of the Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. In chapter 5 of Matthew, he records Jesus also saying, if someone would force you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Just going that extra mile for somebody, right? Someone forcing you to do something that you don't want to do, don't just do what they force you to do something extra, right? Show them how you're going to rise above that situation and how they're not in control of how you react and how you feel. But that's not our inclination. That's not what we want to do. When somebody wrongs us, we want to make it right. We feel like we deserve to make it right. We feel like we deserve justice. We feel like that wrong was not something that we incurred justifiably, and so we need to fix it. And somebody needs to fix it. And if somebody else is not going to fix it for us, then we're going to fix it for ourselves. But I think about that, and I think about our enemies, and I think about people that undermine us on purpose. And that's how we're supposed to love them. You understand what love is, right? I mean, we feel love for people. And the Greek language, what the New Testament was written in, obviously has multiple words for love. And so we feel love in different ways for different people for different reasons. But when you think of your enemy, that's not somebody that you think of loving, right? When I think of enemies, I think of like superheroes, right? The latest one that I saw is Avengers Infinity War. It's incredible. I won't spoil it for anybody. I tend to do that. I tend to spoil movies for you guys when I'm up here, but I won't spoil that one. It's too good. But when I think of the villain in that movie, and I think of the heroes in that movie, those guys don't love each other. You know what I mean? They're not walking up to each other, and having cookies and milk and saying, well, this is what I want to do. Well, I don't think that would be a good idea. Let's not kill half the universe. Let's figure out something else to do, right? They fight each other, right? They're trying to stop each other physically. And that's what I think of when I think of enemies, and that's what I think of when I think of enemies in my life. My inclination is not to love them. My inclination is not to do good for them. Jesus doesn't just say love them. He says do good for them. And I think about, how can we do good for our enemies? What does God expect us to do for our enemies when we're doing good for them? We can go back to Proverbs chapter 25, and we see a little example here of something that we can do for our enemies. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 21. It says, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. And if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. If your enemy is suffering, if your enemy is lacking in something, provide for his needs. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you think, can you picture yourself doing that? Think about that person at work that just has a terrible attitude, and that person who has kind of messed things up for you, messed things up for the team, whatever it happens to be, whatever your enemy happens to be. Imagine providing for that person's physical needs. When it talks about hunger and thirst here, like these are basic human, like you need these to survive. This isn't just like helping somebody be comfortable. This is helping somebody stay alive. And this is what God's word tells us to do for our enemies. And I think about that kind of love. What kind of, like, how do you get to that point where you can do that for somebody who you consider your enemy? Fortunately, Jesus didn't just tell us how to do this. Jesus showed us how to do it as well. Luke chapter 23. This is where Jesus is hanging on the cross. Luke chapter 23 and verse 34, and Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You think about what Jesus is doing here. You talk about enemies. Jesus is asking forgiveness for the people that have unjustly arrested him in the garden, who have put him on trial multiple times through the night in front of multiple judges, brought false accusations against him. They've beaten him. They've stripped him naked. They've forced him to carry a cross, and they've nailed him to that cross, and they've hung him up there to suffocate to death. And they're actually sitting at the foot of the cross while he's dying, casting lots for the clothes that they've ripped off his back. If that's not an enemy, I don't know what is. And yet Jesus says, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. And I wonder sometimes, if I could love my enemies in that way. I couldn't die for their sins, obviously. That's not something I'm capable of doing. But could I love them enough to provide for their needs? Could I love them enough to go that extra mile for them? Could I love them enough to do something for them that they need? Even though they seek to undermine me, maybe they even physically assault me, maybe they take something of mine unjustly, could I then to that person do something incredibly generous and sacrificial? I don't know that I could. I don't know that I could. And the next group of people that I want to talk about, in my opinion, I think it would be even harder to love in that way. In a certain way, in certain ways, I think it would be even harder. This second group of people I want to talk about are strangers. So these are people that aren't necessarily like actually trying to undermine you or actually assaulting you or actually downtrodden you. But these are just people that you meet on a regular basis. We interact with strangers every day. They could be people at the grocery store. They could be people at a restaurant. They could be people at work. Maybe you work with people that you've never met before. Those are strangers. They could be people in traffic, on the road. We interact with strangers every day. And I'll tell you how I interact with strangers most of the time, and this is where it really started hitting me. Because like I said, I can't really nail down someone who is my enemy. But I can definitely nail down strangers that I don't love the way that I need to. I've talked in here before about my shortcomings when it comes to driving, okay? Here's the problem, okay? I am an expert driver. No one else on the road is, apparently. But I am, okay? And so it's frustrating for me, for someone who is such a good driver. I'm going to stop. It's frustrating for me when people don't react on the road the way that I feel that they should, or the way that I would if I were in their situation. In other words, if I were in front of me right now, this is what I would do to let me go around, okay? This is, I probably shouldn't say that it's my biggest fault, but it is definitely top 3 biggest faults of mine, is impatience on the road. I've never gotten out of my car and like yelled at anybody or threatened anybody or anything like that. But when it comes to driving, like I really, really, really need to work on my patience when it comes to that. And I've ridden with some of you in this room, and you guys need to work on it too. As bad as I am, you're worse. All right, that's just how it goes. It's frustrating for me. Something else that's frustrating for me is at grocery stores. Okay, I have a lot of grocery store pet peeves. All right, I'm giving you guys a glimpse into my head here. Okay, so y'all don't judge me. I need y'all to love me. Okay, at grocery stores, most of them, you have one side that has enter written above it and one side that has exit written above it. Right? Apparently, I'm the only one that sees that, because every time I go, you have people that are coming in the exit and going out the enter. And I don't actually know why the store puts a sensor on both sides. If you're going to designate one for entrance, there should only be one way to get in, and there should only be one way to get out. And to me, that's the way you fix this situation. So then I'm frustrated with the people who put the sensors on both sides. Okay, something else that bothers me at grocery stores is the fire lane outside, right? So I don't know how wide it is, but it's got these cross marks in it. And it says, it's written there, no parking, fire lane. Apparently, I'm the only one that reads that too. Hannah and I went to Hobby Lobby out on Gun Barrel, which Gun Barrel is a terrible place to go if you get frustrated in traffic. But we went to Hobby Lobby on Gun Barrel, and that whole big strip mall, there's like 10 shops in that strip mall. And I think about 10 cars were parked in the fire lane in that strip mall. I think there was one outside of every store. And I was like, and this isn't people that are just sitting out there waiting on somebody to come out. These are people that have parked there and gotten out of their cars, left their cars running with their flashers on. And I'm like, turning your flashers on doesn't make it okay. Like, if this building catches on fire, the fire truck needs to sit there, right? There's parking spaces right there. People who live buggies in parking spaces, right? I'm sorry, I could go on all day, and it's bad that I could go on all day, right? I shouldn't find that many things to be frustrated about. But when it comes to interacting with strangers, I've got some work to do, okay? I've got some work to do. It's a bad deal, okay, for me with strangers sometimes. Now, other times, actually most of the time, if I'm actually face-to-face interacting with somebody, I'm not going to be a jerk to them. I might be thinking, hey, you shouldn't have parked in the fire lane, but I'm not going to be a jerk to them. Those people that are walking in the wrong door, I'm not going to try to run them down with the buggy and teach them a lesson. You know, that's not what I'm going to do. You know, I still try to keep from hitting people, and I don't give dirty looks to people, and I don't say snide comments to people or anything, but when it comes to loving strangers, it's something that I personally need to work on quite a bit. Again, Jesus didn't just tell us how we're supposed to love strangers. He showed us how we should love strangers. In Luke chapter 8, verse 43, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had immediately been healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So you have the woman with the discharge of blood. In Mark chapter 2, you have the story of the paralytic where these men let their friend down through the roof while Jesus is teaching in someone's house, and Jesus heals him. And in Mark chapter 6, you have this story, starting in verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Here's 3 quick stories of Jesus interacting with strangers. The first one that I read in Luke, the woman with the discharge of blood, Jesus is actually on his way to heal someone else. Jairus has actually come to Jesus and said, "My daughter is dying at home. I need you to come and heal her." And he's on his way to heal her, and he can't get there very quickly because there's so many people that are crowding in on him and preventing him from even getting there. And this one woman in the crowd who has had a discharge of blood her whole life has come now, and she sneaks up behind him and she touches his garment, and it heals her immediately. And Jesus feels that power leave him, and obviously he stops. And Jesus could have reacted in this way. He could have said, "Why have you stopped me on the way to heal someone else? Could you not have waited till I got there and let me heal her so that then I could heal you?" And he has all of these people around him constantly. And Jesus could have gotten upset about that. At the same time, in Mark chapter 2, Jesus is sitting in someone's house teaching. And these guys obviously interrupt his teaching because they rip the roof off from above him. I mean, can you imagine sitting somewhere in a building and all of a sudden the roof starts coming off? And you look up and there's these guys that are ripping the roof off right above your head. And then they let down this paralytic man on a mat and set him in front of you so that you can heal him. Could you not have waited until I was done teaching and then I could have healed him after that? Or in Mark chapter 6, he's been with all of these crowds, and he and his disciples have been teaching these crowds and been healing people. And he says, "Come away and rest a while," because they're human beings, right? Even the Son of God needs to take a break. He needs to rest because he's a man. He's a human. And so they get in a boat to go across the sea to a desolate place. But when they get there, it's not desolate anymore, right? Because the crowds have seen where they're going, and they run around on foot and make it before they get there. And Jesus says, "Can you not just let us have a break? Can you not just let us take a rest?" No, that's not what Jesus says. Jesus could have easily gotten frustrated about all of these things, about all of these people constantly crowding in on him, all of these people constantly wanting his attention, not even letting him have one place to go and just have a couple hours to sit and eat. But when Jesus got to the other side of that lake and he saw all of those crowds that were waiting on him, the crowds that he just left behind to take a rest, he had compassion on them. And the rest of the story is one that most of us are familiar with. He feeds the 5,000. He feeds these people. He doesn't just heal them. He doesn't just teach them. He feeds them because he had compassion on them. Let me tell you something. I'm in that situation. As extroverted as I am, I need a break. I need you to leave me alone for a minute. I even do that now. And I don't have crowds pressing in around me. I don't have people making a ton of demands on my time. I don't have those things going on in my life. But every now and then, I need a break. We all do, don't we? And I think when I'm driving down the road, man, I've got somewhere to go. This person's in my way. Well, what are they going to? Where are they headed? Who are they? I don't even know. I have no idea. Who am I to pass judgment on them? Who am I to say what I need to do right now is more important than what you need to do right now? So I would appreciate it if you would move so that I can get to where I'm going. That's not how Jesus loved strangers. That's not the compassion that Jesus felt for them. It was so much deeper than that. So much deeper than that. The third group of people that I want to talk about may, at times, also be even harder to love than strangers. Harder to love than enemies. Third group of people I want to talk about are friends. We'll put family in there too. Friends and family. In John chapter 15, starting in verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. These men that Jesus has been walking around with, these men that Jesus handpicked, some of them to drop their nets, some of them to walk away from the tax booth. These men that Jesus personally asked to follow him, dropped what they were doing to do so. And he says here, you are not my servants. If you were my servants, you wouldn't know what I was up to. If you were my servants, you wouldn't know where I was going, what the end of all of this was. I would not have prepared you to carry on after me in the way that I have. He says, I call you friends. I haven't withheld a single thing from you. You have borne this ministry, borne all of the burdens, all of the grief, all of these things. You've been right next to me. You are my friends. And even more than that, he says elsewhere, those who do the will of my Father are my brothers and sisters and mothers and father. He says, these are my family. This is my family. My friends and my family are one and the same. These are the people that I love most. And yet what happened to Jesus with his friends, with these men that he called his family? Judas betrayed him. Peter denied him. The rest of the 12 abandoned him. After all that time, after him telling them what was coming, after seeing the miracles, after hearing the teachings, after spending all of this 3+ years, walking around Israel with this man, they just deserted him. And you know what? Jesus knew it was going to happen. When he chose them, when he said, drop your nets and follow me, when he said, leave your tax booth and follow me, he knew that that's what they were going to do. He told Peter that night, he said, you're going to deny me 3 times. He told Judas, go and do what you need to do. Before any of that happened, he washed their feet. He knew that they would leave him in the garden. He knew that the rest of them wouldn't come to the garden with him. the 3 that he took to the inner part of the garden with him wouldn't stay awake and stay watch. They wouldn't stay awake and pray with him about what was about to happen. He knew they would abandon him. He knew that Peter would deny him 3 times, emphatically. He knew it would happen. And he loved him anyway. He went to the cross for him anyway. And even on the cross, he looked down at John, who was standing there with his mom, and he said, with his mother Mary, and he said, "Behold your mother." And he said to Mary, "Behold your son." Just re-emphasizing the fact, you are my brother, you are my blood, my family. You're not just my friend, you are my beloved brother. And I'm doing this for you. And he went to the cross for him, knowing that's what they were going to do. And I think about that. And I think about how I treat my friends and my family. Now, I have friends that I treat very well. I have family that I treat very well. But you know what? I have friends and family that I don't ever talk to. My best friend growing up, couldn't be closer to him. Blood couldn't have made us closer. After high school, we went different ways, kind of lost touch there for a while. But you know what? We live 3 minutes away from each other right now. I never see him. Never see him. Never talk to him. He's a member of a Baptist church here in town. We never talk about God, ever. I don't know how often we have talked about God. He had to find out that Hannah and I were pregnant again on Facebook. You know why? He's my best friend, but I didn't tell him. I don't know why I didn't tell him. I have family members that I asked to be here tonight because I was speaking. But I don't ask them to be here on any other night. I don't go over and talk to them. I don't go over and see them at their house. I have family members that I know are not going to heaven. No chance. But I never talk to them about it. You know why? Because I don't love them like this. And it breaks my heart that I don't love them like this. And I don't know why I let myself get to that place where I don't love them like this. You know, I saw a video by a man named Penn Jillette. I think you guys have probably heard of him, maybe. He was a magician, but he's an avid atheist. He's known more for his atheism than he is for his magic. But he did a video one time where he was talking about after one of his shows, somebody came up to him and gave him a Bible and said, "Hey, I'm not going to try to preach at you or anything like that, but I just wanted to give this to you. I really enjoyed your show. I think you're a fantastic talent, but I wanted to give you a Bible." And he accepted it, you know, and they were really polite about it. And he went home and made a video about it. And he said, you know, I know for a fact that God doesn't exist. I know that nothing in the Bible is true, that it's all fake, that all of that is just nonsense. But he said, if you truly believe in what the Bible says, and you truly believe that God exists and that we are sinners and that we need to be saved by Jesus Christ, if you truly believe that, how much do you have to hate people to not tell them? And for an atheist, an avid atheist, to say that, and for me to hear that, I have no words for that. Because there are people, and I listed these groups in order of to me, of increasing difficulty, right? To me, it's harder to love my friends and family the way that I'm supposed to than it is for me to love strangers. And it's harder for me to love strangers on the street than it is for me to love my enemies the way that I'm supposed to. Because, and isn't that interesting? How it's harder to love the people that you're closest to the way that you should. Not just love them. I definitely love them. But if I'm going to love them the way that Jesus tells me to love them, I'm missing the mark. And I'm missing the mark more with the people who are closest to me than the people that I've never met. And it hurts. It hurts that I let myself be that way. And I'm making a resolution now to not be that way anymore. Because it's too precious. Gary's been talking about the gospel and the good news. This good news is too precious for people to not hear it. It's too important for people to not know that it's real. And if we are truly going to love people the way that we should, if we are truly going to call ourselves followers of Christ, we have to love them the way that Christ loved them. And Christ gave up everything. Everything. There wasn't a person he didn't want to reach. There wasn't a person he didn't want to heal. He didn't want to teach. He didn't want to show compassion on. There wasn't a single one. And there wasn't a person that he didn't die on the cross for. And so I hope that you'll pray for me that I will increase my love for others. Just reckless abandon. Just because the love that we need to be showing to others is this kind of love. This love that just unravels you, where you have nothing left. And I've thought about why I don't love people that way. And I thought, well, we have different lives. We have different schedules, and it's hard to get together. It's hard to see each other on a regular basis. And then I think, especially for my friend that I told you about, he's 3 minutes away. Is it really that hard for me to drive 3 minutes to see him? Is it really that hard for me to pick this thing up and say something to him? It's not. And I think about that excuse that pops in my head, and I think my next thought is God going to accept that from me? Am I really going to walk into the throne room of God on Judgment Day, and God asks me, why didn't you talk to him? God, I was busy. No. No. That's not going to fly. Because God knows, doesn't he? He knows the answer before he asks the question. We see that over and over in Scripture. He knows the answer before he asks the question. He knows what I'm doing. He knows how busy I am, and he knows that he sent his son to die for that person that I'm not talking to. And so I hope you'll pray for me, and I hope that you will examine your own life and how you love others. And I hope that if you find that the way that you love others is lacking, that you will boldly reinforce that love. That you will actively find ways to love people the way that Jesus did. Jesus went out of his way to love people. Do you think it was convenient? It wasn't convenient for Jesus. Do you think it was easy? I'm sure the human side of him didn't think it was easy all the time. But the way that he loved them, the way that he loves us, is unwavering. It's a kind of love that just issues forth without any kind of restraint. That's the way that we have to love each other, and that's the way we especially have to love people, because that's the way that he said we will be known, that is by the way we love each other and by the way that we love others. They'll know that we belong to him because our love will look so different that there's only one explanation for it. That it has to be supernatural, and it has to come from somewhere besides what these people have ever experienced. That's the way we ought to love. And I hope that you will love that way. If you don't love that way, it's time to start. If you've never experienced that kind of love, we can introduce you to it. If you're sitting here tonight and you have never put on Christ in baptism, do so now. Jesus came to this earth. He lived a perfect life. He stepped down from heaven. He gave up an existence that we cannot even imagine, to come here and live and trudge through all of the things that we go through. And he did it perfectly, and then he died an excruciating death so that we could be saved from sin. And if you don't know, that's the good news. If you don't know that, and if you haven't taken part of that, we want to help you do that right now. If you've never come to Jesus, please come tonight. If you have come to Jesus, there's something in your life that's keeping you from loving people this way. Maybe you don't even love yourself this way. Come and get rid of it. Come and be done with it, because God wants to take it from you. He wants you to be clean. He wants you to be whole, and he wants you to love people this way because he loves you this way. If you have any need whatsoever, come as we stand and sing.